VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We're here on schedule release day. We've got some tidbits from that. We want to jump into that in addition to some other realms of Vikings football featuring James Lynch. Rookie minicamp is in the books. And I want to ask Josh about Ivan Pace, if you can believe that. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. It's definitely it's the latest edition of Christmas Day for the NFL calendar. We get the full schedule tonight, and looks pretty interesting from the Vikings perspective, especially early on in the season. Looks like it's going to be a tough one. But yeah, how are you doing?
Not bad. I since 2021, I've been connected with folks that are very accurate on the schedule. So through about the time this posted, about noon, I got about 9 games for sure. But the one that's absolutely ironclad because the Vikings announced it is the Jets. Rodgers team in London, week 5. I'm sure you saw that when you woke up. What was your initial reaction? And I know I'm not going to ask you if that's like, will they win it? Because who knows between Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy. But what about playing Rodgers across the pond? Vikings putting their undefeated international streak on the line.
I think it is definitely an interesting matchup for the Vikings in international play. I'm a little surprised that that one isn't going to be at US Bank because I think that stadium would be absolutely rocking for that game with the old nemesis Aaron Rodgers coming back to town after taking a year off. But I mean, if you just look at that Week 5 game, that's pretty much capping off what's looking like a really tough start to the schedule for the Vikings, and it's kind of that first 5 weeks with the Jets ending it is kind of like the make or break part of the season for the Vikings. It's crazy to say because it's a 17-week season, but it really is when you look at what those first 5 games look like between Giants week 1 potentially and then 49ers week 2. It's just absolutely chock full of supremely talented teams, and we'll see what old 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers has left in the tank, but it seems like it's going to be a tough one for the Vikings to pull out on. For a home game, that's not even really a home game.
Yeah, I have my own grievance with that as a season ticket holder. I hate that we have to squander the 9 home game advantage. So yeah, out of the gate here, these are, I would say, I consider them confirmed. If I was going to book travel plans, I would do it. But I will caveat to say that these aren't absolutely announced by the Vikings. Week 1 is at the New York Giants. Week 2 returns home against the 49ers, which I think is an ordinary Sunday game. Week 3 is against the Texans, who, if we saw this like a year ago, would be like, oh, sweet. Not anymore. They're a Super Bowl contender. Week 4 is at the Packers. Had to happen sooner or later. Week 5 is what we just touched on at London versus Rodgers and the gang. Week 6, they're going to accept an early bye. And then week 7 at home versus the Lions. Week 8 at the Rams, which might be in prime time. So it's almost like the Giants out of the gate, especially if you want the Vikings to do somewhat decent this year, is a must-win game. I mean, isn't it bizarre to say that a team that probably has a 7-10, 8-9 ceiling, unless Sam Darnold is just an unforeseen baller, that they have to win in week 1?
It really, but it kind of at the same time it feels very similar to that Bucks game last year, where it felt like that was the one that the Vikings could get, and then they had Philadelphia on the road. I forget who was week 3, and then like the Bears, the 49ers, the Chiefs, all back to back to back, and it kind of has a very similar feel where the Vikings absolutely have to get this one that they definitely can win if they're going to do anything this year. So I'm kind of right there with you.
Yeah, week 3 was at the Chargers and was the
That's
infamous game where they tried to gun it and force it into Hawkinson for the win. A play call that would have been great if he would have hung on to the ball. But in retrospect, it looks stupid. Yeah, the schedule is not kind. And we knew it wasn't going to be kind because we knew the opponents. We just didn't know the order. So the way that we know it now, it probably softens up from week 9 thereon. I think we have week 10 at the Jaguars, somewhat confirmed. Week 11 after that at the Titans. And then week 14 is versus Cousins Falcons at home. There were whispers that would be in primetime, but I'm starting to see a lot of primetime games. I don't know if they're going to give the Vikings that many, so we're waiting on that. And then week 18 should be at the Lions, although that one's not confirmed. So the schedule is coming together. And I think you and I have agreed that this isn't an all-in Super Bowl season for the Vikings. It's really what I consider flyover country to get to 2025 because you want to establish this year, kind of like 2014 with Bridgewater, and you want McCarthy to be better than that. You want to see if McCarthy has the DNA to be a franchise quarterback and we have no idea when that'll happen. So based on what you have seen from the schedule leaks or rumors, does that change at all when you think you might see McCarthy? I mean, maybe even week 1, or are we thinking after the bye? What do you got?
Yeah, I think probably the first time they might consider putting McCarthy in would be after the bye.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we've kind of laid this out, I think it was last week, where at least for me, it feels like Darnold is pretty much locked in as the week 1 starter, just because you don't want to throw JJ McCarthy out there, especially when you've got a really tough schedule to start the year and then have his confidence just completely deflate on him.
Mm-hmm.
And over those first few games, I think Darnold is pretty much a lock to start that. And honestly, with the beginning of the schedule, it kind of feels like he might be in there for a little bit longer than after that week 6 bye too. Just because if they start out 2-4, it's going to kind of feel like, okay, well, what's really the point of
Mm-hmm.
risking JJ McCarthy's health at the worst case scenario just to try to battle back and go 7-10 again? So I think they'd probably just roll with Darnold for most of the year at that point.
We're going to be talked into a lot, if we aren't already, this summer about, hey, I think can McCarthy play week 1. Joel Klatt, Fox Sports college analyst, said that he expects McCarthy to play in week 1. And I'm like, where are you getting this? Like,
Yeah.
are you not hearing what the general manager very vividly right after draft said, that there's a lot of teams with dirty hands in NFL history that have rushed a quarterback into week 1. So McCarthy will have to look very genuine and prepared, in my estimation, to be the week 1 starter. I fully understand that Darnold was signed as an insurance policy in case the draft went pear-shaped, like the Falcons take McCarthy at pick number 8, and then your whole plan is Penix and Nix. Fully get that. But I still believe that they'll think a little bit higher on him than we do. That, hey, this Darnold guy, we got Josh McCown right next to him, his former teammate. We can unlock this guy. So I continue to believe that McCarthy will be the week 1, not just week 1 starter. I don't want him to be. I'd rather roll with McCarthy right away, but it isn't up to me. Another thing that came out this week, Vikings had a flurry of roster moves in the last week. None of them humongous, so they didn't make huge headlines. But James Lynch has been re-signed, and this is intriguing because the weakest spot on the roster, per most fans' estimation, is defensive tackle. So I want to know, can James Lynch start for these Vikings, or is that just me hoping a guy that was drafted 4 years ago can have that upside?
I definitely think he can. I think basically at this point, I'm down to anybody in this defensive tackle room can start because nobody's very good, but also nobody's very bad either. But especially for James Lynch, I mean, 2022, the Vikings did have a pretty damn good defensive tackle room with Harrison Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson headlining the way, and Lynch still got 2 starts when those guys were playing alongside each other. So I think that Lynch definitely has a chance. He's been not like super productive at the NFL level, but he definitely, in terms of run stopping, I think he does a really good job at that. He can rush the passer at least a little bit. So I think there's definitely a role for him in the defense, and I wouldn't be all that surprised if he ends up being the starter just because he's very familiar with how the Vikings like to play. He's been in this locker room. I know he was hurt all of last year, but he's still been in the locker room for the past 3-4 years now. So he knows all the guys. He knows what they're trying to do, and I think he'd be a pretty seamless fit alongside Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Bullock at this point.
I'm excited to see how he does that this summer for that very reason. We kind of know Jonah Williams is like, a Dean Lowry, that he's not going to explode and be some sweet like Pro Bowler. We already know the same thing with Jonathan Bullard. That is no mystery. With Jerry Tillery, you cling to a little hope that, hey, maybe Flores can unlock that first round potential. But that's kind of what we said about Jalen Reagor. That didn't work. Or Ross Blacklock. That certainly didn't work. But after those guys, it's hoping for the upside of Jaquelin Roy, hoping that prospect X Levi Drake Rodriguez is really this, dream prospect. And then there's Lynch, who we already know is pretty good. And I think when he's actually seen the field, he's tabulated sacks along the way. But our enthusiasm about him completely dampened during training camp last year when he tore his ACL, and I didn't know if he'd ever be back. Well, he is back, and I think his advantage right now is it's a weak defensive tackle room, at least at the 3 technique spot. Harrison Phillips not included in that weak designation. So yeah, if there was ever a time for Lynch to say, you know what, I can go win a starter's job, this is the place to do it. You don't have to upseed a lot of monsters of rock talents. And so I'm excited to see, mainly because the Vikings found him. Was it the 2020 draft? Is that where he came
I
from?
believe so. Yeah, I think it was what, fourth round, maybe. I
Yeah,
might be
yeah.
wrong about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we continue to think every year, like, oh, this guy might be pretty good, and it was always something. And last year, I honestly thought that was it, because the guy seemed to get habitually injured. So defensive tackle, unless they sign Calais Campbell, is totally in flux. And the only reason I say Calais Campbell is because he's the last best hope. They're probably just going to roll with what they have. All right, I have not spoken with you since rookie minicamp. Now, rookie minicamp is an event that is more about the aesthetic. You can't really learn a lot from just throwing the football. But I will say that JJ McCarthy looked the part, the way that he flips the ball, and he certainly has the camera angle down. Either that, or in addition to that, what were a takeaway or two from you about Vikings rookie minicamp?
I'm kind of on the exact same page with you. I loved every single video clip that the Vikings put out of JJ McCarthy just slinging that thing around. And I think Kevin O'Connell's comments during that weekend were very positive of McCarthy. And I don't think they were ever going to be anything but positive. But the fact that this guy was out there before practice even started, just running through plays by himself, it shows the work ethic and the character that this guy's bringing to Minnesota, and just that winning culture that he had over at Michigan. It's kind of just bleeding over into the Vikings facilities now, and I'm excited to see that in action. But yeah, I think this dude, he's saying all the right things, he's doing all the right things, and at this point in the summer, we're not even to June, the OTAs, mandatory minicamp, training camp. I think that's all you can really do at this point, and I think he's passing every single one of those tests. So I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, of the big six that we talked about that ended up getting all drafted in round one, only one human being from that big six had something somewhat adverse said about him during rookie minicamp, and that was my guy, Drake May, where the Patriots said, quote, he's got a long way to go. So in theory, that could have been the Vikings saying that quote about May, or Kevin O'Connell could have said something similar about McCarthy. And that's about the most negative possible thing you could say about somebody during rookie minicamp, because nothing bad can happen at rookie minicamp. So I'm taking a little victory lap that my advice was ignored and the Vikings selected McCarthy and not Drake May, even though it's not the end of the world to say Drake May has a long way to go. That would have been about the only thing that could have come out of Vikings minicamp that made us go, ugh. All right. Yeah. Well, we already knew that, but yeah,
Yeah.
it felt like McCarthy. Like, there might be some that say, like, well, if he's on the microphone, what good does that do if he can't throw a football? I get it, but being able to lead, a lot of that has to the way that you communicate. And I would say on the microphone, or just the way that he carried himself, was encouraging. And we'll get to see more of it at OTAs, and then, my goodness, mandatory minicamp is only 20 days away. But
Yeah.
the McCarthy part is cool, mainly because it's the first time we've had a rookie quarterback since 2014. Is that kind of what you're expecting from this season? Is a Bridgewater-like 2014 season where we admit that it's going to be back then 7-9, this year 7-10, but it'll be an exciting version?
Yeah, I think so. I think I do say that excuse me, JJ McCarthy has a lot more weapons than Bridgewater had at
Yeah,
that point in time with the
true.
Vikings. So I think it'll be a little bit easier of a transition for him moving into O'Connell's offense, assuming he gets to start at some point this year.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it might be a little bit better than Bridgewater, but I mean, Bridgewater's rookie season was fine. If that happens with JJ McCarthy, I'll definitely take it, and just hope and pray that nothing happens to his knees. Just bubble wrap them for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, I referenced the 2014 season because it was really the last time, for sure, that the Vikings waltzed into a summer and then September without Super Bowl stakes. Now, some
Yeah.
non-Vikings fans will be like, you guys are never going to win a Super Bowl in those 10 years. Well, at least the team's leadership said we are in this to win this, especially going into the 2016 season when they traded for Sam Bradford. Every year since, they've tried to duplicate the year before with roster enhancements. But in 2014, we knew with Bridgewater and Matt Castle, like, they're not going to win a Super Bowl. And that's how I feel right now about the Vikings, is they're not going to win a Super Bowl. Even if Sam Darnold does do the Baker Mayfield thing, that's not going to be good enough to beat the Lions and NFC blah 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 or the 49ers. So I'm fully content in saying if these Vikings finish 7-9, but McCarthy plays at least 4 games and looks the part, then this time next year will be really fun, because very realistically, the Vikings could be in the Texans spot where you've got a good quarterback, you've got all the money in the world to spend on free agents, and the sky is the limit. All right, one other thing I want to ask you about today is I saw an article on ProFootballFocus.com that detailed every team's underrated player. So I scrolled through it, and there were a lot of good dudes that even I didn't know that much about. But when they got to the Vikings, they said Ivan Pace. And I was like, So I started to think, well, maybe this is the national view, because Ivan Pace, to me, has not been underrated by this community. We've actually hyped him to high heavens since this time last year. But to a national lens, evidently, he's just catching on. In addition to whether or not Pace would be your underrated Viking, or what you feel about Pro Football Focus's estimation of that, who do you consider the underrated Vikings player as we get close to summer?
I could definitely see the Ivan Pace selection there, just because over the past decade, the Vikings have been absolutely fantastic at linebacker. And all those veteran guys have gotten a lot of the highlights or a lot of the headlines. And Ivan Pace just kind of came into the building last year, did his thing. But I think Josh Metellus' emergence really took away some of his shine. And then maybe Cameron Bynum being there and doing the things that he did at the safety position as well. Daniil Hunter being one of the league's sack leaders. I think Ivan Pace, I think it definitely by the end of the year, I think he started going under the radar a little bit just with how much he actually does for the Vikings defense.
Yeah.
And with Hicks no longer around as a blitzer, I think that means Ivan Pace is going to be doing that even more in 2024. And I think we're kind of in store for a pretty massive year from him in terms of production. So I definitely understand that selection. In terms of underrated Vikings on this roster, this would be, I think it's ultimately Ty Chandler if I had to pick a guy. Just because I think the Aaron Jones signing, I think, has a lot of people just assuming he's going to be plugged in as RB1. And I laid this out last week. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case, especially for the early portion of the regular season. I think they're going to just let Jones chill for a bit, maybe get, I don't know, 10, 15 touches a game during the early portion of the year. And then if they're sitting 6-6 with a chance to make the playoffs, then it's like, okay, Jones, go do your thing. We're going to step back and just let you go to work and win us some games here. But I think Ty Chandler, he's definitely showed me some things down the stretch of 2023. And I think with no more question of, hey, is this guy actually going to be able to contribute to the offense? Because Cam Akers was in that room last year for a part of it. Myles Gaskin was taken in. And it seemed like the Vikings were trying to do absolutely everything they could to not put Ty Chandler on the field for the early portion of the year. And then the fact that when they actually did that, he thrived and actually looked like a really decent running back, and his confidence just wasn't completely taken away because they were signing so many veterans over and over and over again. I think that means this year, where he's solidified in his role, he knows what he's going to go into this season doing. I think that's going to result in a pretty productive year for him.
And he could score touchdowns. We had this really strange drought, whether it was the total fault of Alexander Mattison or the play calling. We couldn't score rushing touchdowns. And it took until Chandler got in the line. Or I guess Akers scored one against the Falcons.
He had the first one of the year.
Yeah. And then once we got to the Bengals game, which started wonderfully, Chandler, for the first time since 2022, when Dalvin here and there looked the part, it was like, oh, I forgot how it feels to have a running back who can do the thing. And then let's see, Vikings didn't do much of anything the following 2 games, but then in the season finale against the Lions, I'm pretty sure Chandler fired up another memorable game. So yeah, I like that one, because when you sign a running back for $6 million, who is a one-time, 2-time Pro Bowler in Aaron Jones, you kind of think, oh, well, yeah, he's going to get the baton. But your theory on using him gradually, because you want to save him, one of these guys will get hurt. If you have 2 running backs, one of them is going to get dinged up, and it's not controversial to say that. So yeah, you can preserve Jones while exploring the upside of Chandler, because you've already seen Chandler may not be the best pass pro that there is, but he can move the sticks and, chip off those 4.5, 5 yards per carry, which is what the Vikings desperately need. They haven't really done that. Even in 2022, the running game didn't perform well, but it was masked by Dalvin Cook's 4 huge touchdowns of
The
40 or
Dolphins
50 yards.
game,
Yeah.
it was the Colts game. Every single one of these games had one big play from him, but it was in between those big plays, there was nothing.
Yeah, it was so weird. And actually, if we're going to be pro Dalvin for a moment, it was because of him that comeback against the Bills was possible. I remember them being down, was it 27-10 in the third quarter? And then he ripped off a substantial touchdown run, and it was like, oh, wait a second.
Maybe we got a shot.
Yep. And that there was, I sometimes think about that game and how many moments, I swear to God, there were 12 moments that the Vikings did the right thing, whether it was a KJ Osborne 4th and 3 little sweep, where everything would have been undone if one thing had not gone their way. And Dalvin's touchdown when they were down 17 kickstarted it all. So I like the Chandler pick. I can see why Ivan Pace would be considered underrated if you're not part of the Twin Cities media market, because undrafted short guy, who the hell's that? It's just that since I've learned about him since this time last year.
We've been on his hype train since last May. So.
Well, as soon as Harrison Smith said it, I can't remember which month that was. Somebody asked Harrison Smith, give us somebody who's going to be a breakout guy, and he smirked and said Ivan Pace. If Harrison Smith's going to say that, then you can take it to the bank. He's not going to just promote some guy that's, just mid. So, all right, sir. So next Wednesday, we will be still in the grind pre-mini camp. So we shall determine what to discuss then. Until then, do you have any closing arguments for VikesNow viewers?
Let's just hope that Atlanta game's in primetime, because I want to see that.
Yeah, that was the credible rumor, and I still believe it's possible. But when we already have what we think the Rams primetime, and then the Bears is usually primetime, I guess they could have 3. It's just that typically a team that doesn't have a big juicy winning record the year before isn't given that much love. But maybe it's 3 or maybe it's 4. All right, sir. We'll talk to you in 1 week. You have a wonderful week. All right.
You too, man. See you then.
Yep. Take it easy.